Open a word of prayer. Lord, thanks for this day. Pray you'll help us today as we work through some of the current events that are going on in the world today that relate to Bible prophecy, and bless our time together in Jesus' name, amen. Well, so this is my grid that I use. I talk about it every week and the things that are going on. I was talking to somebody, and I saw a number of comments this week in some different Facebook groups. It'd be very easy to say, as I'm sort of reading through some of these groups, that people are sort of losing their grip on things. Somebody in discussion with me this week, and then I also saw this in a Facebook or Twitter discussion. Well, how do you know this in end times? This is the way it's always been. It's always been like this since the beginning of human history, and ever since the Lord returned, on the Mount of Olives there, 10 days before Pentecost. It's always been the same, and I don't see this that often. So we talk about acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding, and how things are just sort of rocketing to a conclusion. Let me give you an example. Now this is political, and I was not aware of this. I don't know if I have it in my, excuse me. Sorry about that. Somebody gave me some info the other night, and I don't seem to have it. So we have a new, by the way, so somebody the other night at the church where I was doing a little prophecy seminar for just a small group of people, she had on a shirt that said, "Vote no on issue 1." And I'm like, I just saw t-shirts that said, "Vote yes on issue 1" in our last election. If you remember, in the last election, we had an issue, and what it would require a 60% vote of the voters to approve an issue that would become part of the Constitution of the state of Ohio. And part of the reason why the Ohio legislature put that last issue on the ballot was to prevent pro-abortion groups from coming in and reinstituting things concerning abortion that Ohio has outlawed. So it's a big political fight, and now my understanding is, I don't think it's in the primary election, I think it's next fall, there will be another issue 1 on the ballot, and this one will be to reinstate a lot of abortion rights. People can get abortions more easily. There's also some talk that some of the things that might be coming along with that, it will be follow-on legislation that they've already started drafting, and that will do things, I don't know if it's as extreme as what's happened in California with AB 957, but AB 957 in California, what it does is it, in divorce domestic situations, if one of the parents has not been affirming of a child's transition to another gender, and this happens a lot. There are, what's that called? Munchausen by proxy or something like that. It's where it's usually women, they cause their children to have a disease or a condition, so they get treatment and attention. And this is what's happening a lot in marriages. I mean, I've even seen marriages where there might be 2 physicians married to each other. The mother wants custody and the mother wants to transition the little boy to a little girl, or vice versa. The husband objects to this. And now in California, if you're not affirming of this, you will not get custody of your child. That's sort of a presumption against custody. And they're going to expand this. So this is a really big issue. And it appears that there are moves afoot to bring some of this stuff into the state of Ohio if they can get this next issue 1, which I believe is on the ballot November 7th, 2024, approved by a majority of the voters in Ohio. So just understand there are consequences to these things. There was a lot of talk when Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, that this was a great day for pro-life people, and it was, but it didn't mean it was at an end. It meant that the really hard work started, because now you have to fight it state by state. But it's become a big issue in some states, and because they've had 50 years to indoctrinate people about pro-abortion policies, in a lot of states that you even think are conservative, like Kansas and some other places, they've completely flipped the pro-life thing upside down, and they've become very pro-abortion. And so that's what one side of the aisle in the parties that govern us, the uniparties that govern us, they want to change things back. And the New York Times reported, and I think it was entirely accurate this week, that there have been more abortions in the year since Roe versus Wade got overturned than there were in the prior year. And part of that is because they've made because of the Biden administration, they've made it very easy to get the day after pills, the pills that cause an abortion, easy to get by mail, even in states that might have laws restricting it. So this is a big fight. It's a big issue. And again, one of these things we also talk about is the understanding that people will have as we get closer to the end. And I don't think this is limited to people like, I know some people say, well, this is the 144,000 in that last week of human history that will have understanding, or the two witnesses will have understanding. I think this is common folk that are around will have understanding. They'll be going back and forth through the book. And like Daniel says, and I heard but I understood not, said I, oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. But I think it's been I'm concerned with the way things are going in the Bible prophecy community. I see a lot of infighting that grieves me a lot, with people who differ over certain ideas, certain interpretations. For example, there's a current dispute about, is there a 70th week of Daniel? Is the week already been fulfilled? Now, I disagree with people who are saying that, well, Jesus fulfilled 3.5 years. But 927 says it'll be, the person who's coming will confirm a covenant for 1 week. So that's where, and so what's 1 week mean? It means a week of years. Now, I don't think it should be called the tribulation period. That's my own understanding of Scripture, that's not really used. But everybody's fighting about everything, and I don't think it's advancing the cause of Christ very well. That's just my opinion. And look, I disagree with people, okay, but we can disagree agreeably and in a good way. And I'm just not seeing it. And I hope I'm not contributing to the problem. But this is a chart I made up a long time ago. I've updated it a little bit with better graphics. Certainly, we know Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation that occurs, and that sort of ticks off a 3.5-year period during the reign of the Antichrist. And I see a lot of different ideas floating around about exactly when Jesus returns or how he returns. I think if we're all here, like if I'm not dead and I'm still here, then in this last period of time, But I'm just seeing a lot of what I view as rather inappropriate conduct. So, lighten up, folks. We're all in this together. And I think that you have not seen anything yet. There is... for example, Wendy's and McDonald's are going to have hamburgers on sale this week. Have you heard about this? Now the theory is, I just saw it in my Facebook feed, that they're on sale because those are ground up children that were missing from Maui in the burgers. I also heard from one view this week that the Maui fire was an operation to rescue kids that were being trafficked. Folks, think if you're getting into that kind of thing, you really kind of need to focus on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Just my opinion. And every anniversary of 9/11, every different conspiracy theory in the world comes out, and you're entitled to all your views and that type of thing. Okay, don't think you should divide over it, but this year seemed to be worse than ever with that. So I just would encourage everybody to lighten up a bit with people that you disagree with, that are brothers and sisters in the Lord. So we're ending this period of time. For example, we have the red horse of war, green horse of famine. We have the pale horse of pestilence. And I personally don't think the horses are riding yet, but I don't know for sure. I mean, we are entering a period of time where food's getting expensive. Have you noticed? I think Glenn Beck went out and took, I don't know what he took, $30 or $40, and he went to the store and he showed what he could buy last year for $40 and what he can buy this year for $40, or whatever the number was. And it was half. Like a couple gallons of milk, some bread, some meat, and that type of thing. With the war continuing in Ukraine, and the impact on distribution of grain, I think this is going to be a very difficult year, because a lot of countries are, I know Poland has said, we're not allowing the Ukrainian grain to come into our country because it affects our farmers. India has shut down rice exports, and they're one of the biggest rice exporting countries in the world. And a lot of countries get 40, 50, 60, 70% of their food from countries where there are disruptions. The Panama Canal is reduced to about half traffic and slower traffic right now because they've had a drought down there, and there's a major lake system that's part of the Panama Canal, and the lake is low, so they can't get big ships through. They have to come through. If they do, they're slower and they have lighter loads. Well, that impacts shipping, because the alternative is to go around South America or Africa, which is a bit out of the way. And it's not necessarily a safe passage. So all of these things are having a major impact on everything. The Saudis and the Russians have reduced the amount of oil, which is increasing the cost of gasoline. So we had a Sheetz open this week over on Route 23 near where we have church. I always am grateful when a Sheetz opens, because at least in that particular area, the gas price goes down 50, 60 cents a gallon. But we're living in a crazy time of human history. I mean, I don't even have slides for a lot of this stuff. By the way, I did a number of interviews this week. I don't remember the name of his podcast. Curtis Reed, a Calvary Chapel pastor in Las Vegas, Harvest Life Church. I did an hour, 15, 20 minutes with him. I did an hour and a half with Pablo on his Offhand podcast at Serpents and Doves. I'll be doing some other interviews this week. So I had a very, very busy week, so may not be quite as, my level of disorganization may be a little bit more than my usual level of disorganization today, but I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about the G20 meeting. I want to talk about some of the things that are going on in connection with the G20 meeting and some of the things that were said there. And I think some of these do fit into Bible prophecy because of the way, well, I'll explain that in a moment. Then I want to talk about a counterterrorism conference that took place in Israel this week at Reichman University at the Institute for Counterterrorism, the World Summit on Counterterrorism. Some interesting things said there, some things to report. And then want to talk about the Saudi plan, peace plan, and then some other things that are going on relative to the title, which I think I titled it Hoofbeats of War today. Because everywhere you look, I think everything is on a real trigger edge. So anyway, let's look at the G20. Now, this took place in India. These are the 20 major economies of the world. Some people didn't show up. I don't know if Russia sent a representative or not. China, Xi did not show up. Biden was there. The guy who looks like Biden was there. And so, but look at I want you to pick up the images and the phrasing that's used in these things, because we know there's a global government come. We can read about that in Daniel chapter 7 and 8, and also in Revelation 13. But look at what it says: one earth, one family, one future. By the way, here's a warning. If you think this last week was bad on the globalist agenda, just wait until everybody gets to New York this week for the UN meeting and pushing the Sustainable Development Goals. That's going to happen. But again, the whole theme of all of these conferences, all of these meetings seems to be the same. They want to push climate change, net zero, sustainable development. They're all really tied together in pushing this agenda. So here is the one at G20: one earth, one family, one future. And I hope you can grasp the religious aspect of these things that are coming about in these different meetings. So here is a picture again. You can see some of the people involved. There's von der Leyen, the President of the European Union; Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia; Modi, the head of India; and then the president known as Biden from here. And they talked about a lot of things. Here's a little clip of I'll make sure I have the speech. I want to move this one. Hang on a second here. Boy, I thought I moved this. Well, here's Ursula von der Leyen's opening comments. Here's another picture of, this is sort of one of the graphics that they used for the G20 meeting. Very interesting. So here's von der Leyen's opening comments.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, it's been 2 years since we launched PGII, a joint vision by the world's leading
Actually, I think I have a little bit of a better, one of the things that they did, I have a better clip of her than that one. But this is interesting. This is one of the things that they announced at this G20 meeting. And I may have mentioned a little bit about it last week. It had just come out. Now they've been working on this for a while, but it's called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. And look where it goes. It goes from India to the United Arab Emirates to Saudi Arabia to Jordan, Israel, and on to Europe. Now, this is a response. It's being pushed by the United States because we don't like the undue influence that China is getting through their Belt and Road Initiative. And some of these other countries are a little bit concerned about China becoming too involved. China's more involved in Iran and Russia and the Central Asian stand republics, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, that type of thing. And I've talked a lot about the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, there's a very large port that China has built at Pakistan there near the entrance to the Persian Gulf. And railways across Asia, Russia, all the way to Europe. So there's a competition going on as to who's really going to control the world order. So here's Ursula von der Leyen speaking a little bit about the Middle East, Europe, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor.
It's been 2 years since we launched PGII, a joint vision by the world's leading economies to invest in the infrastructure that low and middle income countries need. And 2 years on, more large-scale projects are seeing the light, and we are presenting two of them today. First, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This is nothing but historic. It will be the most direct connection to date between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe, with a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster, with an electricity cable and a clean hydrogen pipeline to foster clean energy trade between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, with a high-speed data cable to link some of the most innovative digital ecosystems in the world and create business opportunities all along the way. These are state-of-the-art connections for the world of tomorrow, faster, shorter, cleaner. This corridor is much more than just a railway or a cable. It is a green and digital bridge across continents and civilizations. It's been 2 years since.
So here's Benjamin Netanyahu speaking about this corridor. Again, he has his own graphic that he's put up. And here, I think I have a little clip of what he says. But
I would like to thank U.S. President Biden and his administration for the major effort that has led us to today's historic announcement. Several months ago, the U.S. contacted us regarding the realization of this historic opportunity. Since then, it has held urgent diplomatic contacts in order to bring about today's breakthrough. Its vision reshapes the face of our region and allows a dream to become reality. The initiative includes the construction of railways, the laying of a hydrogen pipeline, which is the energy of the future, the laying of fiber optic communications cables, the laying of electricity cables, and more infrastructure.
Now, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen. I don't know that they're there on hydrogen fusion yet to make it economically viable. But you can see that there are these people. You know, here's Mohammed bin Salman at the conference, and Israel and Saudi Arabia are sort of at the core, and United Arab Emirates are at the core of this economic corridor that they've been developing over the last several years. A lot of this does appear to hinge on the normalization agreements that Israel's entered into with countries like Bahrain, UAE, Sudan, and Morocco. But really, Saudi Arabia is key. And so there's a lot of talks, we've been talking a lot about this every week, about the economic core of everything that's going on with regard to the normalization push by what appears to be by the United States, but I don't think is really by the United States is really that involved in it, because they have another agenda. And I talked a lot about that on the podcast with Pablo at Serpents and Doves, at his Offhand podcast, that what really is going on in the Middle East with the Biden administration is a secret deal with Iran. That's what they're doing. They're putting together a secret deal with Iran. They entered into this agreement to send $6 billion for return of U.S. prisoners, hostages. It was a hostage deal. That has led a lot of security people to say that if you're an American traveling abroad in certain countries, you need to be extremely careful because there's apparently a price that will be paid to ransom U.S. citizens. It's an incredibly dangerous thing that they've done. Highly irresponsible, but it appears to be part of a secret deal that the Biden administration, consistent with what Obama did in his first two administrations and what Obama is doing in his third administration. By the way, you cannot tell me that Joe Biden is in charge of anything. I'm sorry. There is something going on. And what's so interesting is is it not obvious to everybody that something's going on there with who's running the show? And do you ever hear it talked about? It's not talked about in the mainstream media at all. Now, but what happened is, this is Al Akbar newspaper. It's a mouthpiece for Hezbollah, which effectively controls the Lebanese government to the extent that there is a government. Our government is funding military operations in Lebanon, but the money, a lot of people think, Tony Badrin at Tablet Magazine, also with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, has written extensively about the fact that this is just a way for our administration, your tax money, to be funneled to Iran and Iranian proxies in the Middle East that are opposed to Israel, that want to destroy Israel. So when the announcement was made at the G20, this is the Monday Monday or Tuesday publication of Al Akbar. And what the headline there says in the middle, Saudi Arabia to Israel, yes to economic normalization. So what the enemies of Israel and Saudi Arabia picked up on was this corridor was, whether there's a formal agreement or anything on normalization, there's not yet, but this was certainly way down the path. Here's what the article says. Israel is at the heart of an unprecedented international project that will link infrastructure between Asia and Europe and will change the features of the Middle East. This is how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu commented on the announcement by his American counterpart, Joe Biden, and his allies at the G20 summit. And you see, by the way, you need to understand this is propaganda by Hezbollah. I don't think there's a good relationship between Biden and Netanyahu. In fact, Biden, or whoever's running the show, if they could get rid of Netanyahu, they would. There's supposed to be a meeting this week at the UN during the UN meetings between Netanyahu and Biden. I have some doubt in my mind that meeting will take place. I think if it does take place, it'll be sort of formal, cordial, nothing of substance will be discussed or decided. So this is how Al Akbar describes that video clip that you just saw of Netanyahu, a celebratory video clip that included visual effects and maps showed Netanyahu saying, "I am pleased, citizens of Israel, to inform you that we will be a central intersection in this economic corridor, and our railways and seaports will open a new gateway from India through the Middle East to Europe, as well as from Europe to India via Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates." So it means exactly what the map shows. The article also goes on to say, explain it away. Negotiations extended for many months, including announced and unannounced visits by American officials to the region. It appeared that the entities, and this is how they refer to Israel as the entity, they never say Israel, the entity's participation in the upcoming corridor was one of the items that had not been decided. It is being agreed upon between its parties, and it remained unresolved as of the date of the New Delhi conference approached, which explains the omission of mentioning it in a number of statements. But the maps all show it. I mean, this is the map, one of the maps that was released, and it clearly shows Israel there. But Hezbollah, Iran, doesn't want that to happen. They are adamantly opposed to this. So one of the other headlines here is Saudi Arabia and Israel on the India corridor line. Economic normalization is proceeding. And down here, the article about Netanyahu, a road littered with mines. In the Jerusalem Post, Herb Keenan wrote this: Israel's remarkable rise as a possible transit hub. This is a big deal that Israel is involved in this. Let's see, I probably should discuss this. I don't have a lot of slides on it. So early this week was some very important hearings took place in Israel on judicial reform. Israel, the Supreme Court has effectively put in place a rule that if it deems anything that the Knesset does to be unreasonable, they're allowed to strike it down. And even though Israel doesn't have a constitution, they're in a constitutional crisis. Because the basic laws that give the judiciary its power, the Knesset wants to amend those, which they appear to be allowed to do. But now there's a hearing that's taking place to determine whether the democratically elected Knesset can enact a law that will take away certain power or restrict the power of the Israeli Supreme Court. Sorry, I'm still a member of the State Bar of Indiana, and sometimes I get a little bit confused. So I'm an old guy, remember? So this is, now they went to Jerusalem Post and some other organizations, went to the ministers in Netanyahu's government and said, if the Supreme Court strikes down the law that the Knesset passed, will you go along with that decision? And as of this article being written the other day, I think this was published on Friday, only 3 ministers said that they would, because this is really core to how people view how the government should work in Israel. And they're in crisis. They've had, protests going on for 10 months, ever since Netanyahu's government came into power. The reasonableness law was passed in late June or early July, or maybe late July. It's not been out that long. And somebody immediately petitioned the court to have it overturned as unreasonable. It's unreasonable to have a law that restricts the Supreme Court from enacting or enforcing its reasonableness standard. And of course, all the people that oppose what the democratically elected Knesset did are saying that, well, this is their dictators. This is the end of democracy. But they were democratically elected. Nobody challenges the election as being unfair or any problems in the election. But there's a shift going on in Israel. There's a demographic shift more to the right. And some of this is conservative Orthodox parties, and some of the Orthodox parties, ultra-Orthodox parties, can be quite they are very good at getting their way. There's a lot of mythology, I think, in some respects that's grown up around it. But people they say that if these ultra-Orthodox parties have their way, it will be almost like enacting Sharia law in an Islamic country. And that could be true. I don't know that they'll get it through. And so some people, even that would lean conservative, would say the only way to protect us against that overreach is to have a Supreme Court that can just sort of willy-nilly strike down any law that it deems unreasonable. So now we have a constitutional crisis in a country that doesn't have a constitution. Again, here's this other article too. Netanyahu announces U.S. trip, but still no word on Biden meeting. So Netanyahu is coming to the U.S. after the holidays are over. I think he leaves on Monday, and he'll be going to San Francisco to meet with Elon Musk because he wants Musk to invest in Israel. And Israel is a big tech hub. Musk has a fair amount of money, even with the rather, at least so far, disastrous investment into Twitter, now known as X. Seems to be not the best brand name decision, but Musk is a technocrat. And while everybody likes that he maybe has improved Twitter a little bit, he's still a technocrat. Remember, I think I told you that when I was researching Technocracy, I ran across an article from 2018 in the Financial Times that talked about the growth of technocracy, particularly in Canada, where Canada was so concerned about the growth of technocracy, people who wanted to control everything back in the 1930s, which is kind of ironic because now they have a technocrat in charge that wants to control everything. But back in the 1930s, they banned it. And the leader of the technocratic movement in Canada was a guy named Handelman. Handelman got upset or concerned for his own personal freedom, so he left. And he went to South Africa, and now his grandson is one of the leading technocrats in the world, Elon Musk. So that digital apple didn't fall very far from the tree, I guess you would say, or something like that. So virtual apple. But these technocrats, they want to control everything. So you see the one earth, one future, one family description at the European State of the... So von der Leyen went to the G20, then she went to Brussels and gave the European State of the Union talk, or speech, and here's what she said in that. And I'm going to show you what she said. Was she talked about in a separate statement issued this week about the future. But here's what she said at the EU State of the Union about digital platforms.
Now, when it comes to making business and life easier, we have seen how important digital technology is. It is telling that we have far overshot the 20% investment target in digital projects in Next Generation EU. Member states have used that investment to digitize the healthcare system, justice system, transport network, and at the same time, Europe has led on managing the risks of the digital world. The internet was born as an instrument for sharing knowledge, opening minds, and connecting people. It still is. But it has also given rise to serious challenges: disinformation, spread of harmful content, risk to the privacy of our data. All of this led to a lack of trust and sometimes a breach of fundamental rights of people. In response, Europe has become the global pioneer of citizens' rights in the digital world. The DSA and DMA are creating a safer digital space where fundamental rights are protected. And they are ensuring fairness and clear responsibility for big tech. This is an historic achievement, and I think we should be proud of it.
So here is what she also released this statement called One Future in relation to this. But look at what she says in this statement. One thing seems clear: the future will be digital. Today, I want to focus on AI and the digital infrastructure. As it has been described, AI has risk, but also offers tremendous opportunities. The crucial question is how to harness a rapidly changing technology. It is telling that even the makers and inventors of AI are calling on political leaders to regulate. In the EU in 2020, we presented the first ever law on artificial intelligence. We want to facilitate innovation while building trust, but we need more. What she means is we need more control and regulation. What the world does now will shape our future. She goes on to say, I believe that Europe and its partners should develop a new global framework for AI risk. It should protect us against systematic societal risk and foster investments in safe and responsible AI systems at the same time. At global level, we eventually need to replace the broader community of the United Nations. We need to reach the broader community of the United Nations. We need a similar body to the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change for Climate, and here we need additional outreach to the scientists, entrepreneurs, and innovators, the technocrats. You see how that's all sort of linked together. They need to provide the knowledge on the risk posed by AI as well as the potential benefits for humanity. So what are we now, 3 months or more down the road from when people finally started to realize with what was going on with artificial intelligence, which is still relatively in its infancy or young child stage, but there are concerns with where it's going and how fast it's developing. Companies that have focused on AI that are able to produce, like NVIDIA, are making a ton of money. Others are having some problems because they haven't figured out a business model yet on the way to charge people to use their platforms to make money off of them. So they're having some trouble raising more money, and their stock prices are not doing very well at the moment. However, that's separate. That's sort of what I would call the public show to distract you about the potential harms of artificial intelligence. What's happening on the other side is people are moving rapidly forward with developing things that are very concerning in the area of war, weapons, defense. I think I've referred a number of times to Scott Pellig's very well done 60 Minutes segment on artificial intelligence, I think from the early April. And in that, you remember he had someone on to talk about getting together the three-dimensional structure, figuring out how to do the three-dimensional structure of biological proteins. There are 200 million of these. So it took them 3 years. So in other words, the public really sort of started talking about artificial intelligence back in November when ChatGPT got released. ChatGPT-4 got released. And everybody went, wow, oh, look at this. It can write my term paper. It can take a law school exam. It can pass a law school exam. It can get admitted to the bar. And there's been a lot of talk about how it's going to replace all the lawyers, which at my age, that's probably not a bad thing to do. I wouldn't have liked this 20 years ago, so go ahead. But with regard to these three-dimensional structure of proteins, the person that Scott Pellig interviewed, I can't remember his name, he said, look, the rule of thumb was that it took a PhD researcher 5 years to come up with a three-dimensional structure of one biological protein. But once we figured it out and we were able to apply this, come up with an algorithm or some way to get the three-dimensional structure of the proteins, we were able to do all 200 million proteins in a very short period of time, literally minutes compared to years. And so 1 billion years of PhD research time gets driven down to a month or two. They're going to do this with other biological structures, DNA, RNA, to develop drugs, pharmaceuticals, and other things to treat people. So that part is moving much, much faster than anybody wants to admit. So a bunch of tech guys came out and said, we got to stop this. If people won't stop this, Eliezer Lukowski said, we need to just bomb their server farms. And we need to track who's using a lot of electricity to power these server farms. So here we sit 3-4 months later, nobody's regulating anything yet that I can determine. Now, on the other side of technology, as van der Leyen said in her speech, we've come out with the DSA and MSA, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Marketing Act, I think it's called. And so what that's going to do is that's going to put in a lot of regulations on the internet, because she mentioned we're concerned about disinformation and misinformation out there. In other words, translate that, stuff that we technocrats don't agree with. So everybody who has the audacity now to speak about health issues, if I understand the new rules for one of our video platforms, you cannot say anything that disagrees with the World Health Organization. And if you do, I had a couple friends this week, Alex Newman said 7 of his videos just got taken down. I have no idea why. They were just removed from YouTube. So it may be that they're going back and removing some of our videos from YouTube too. I don't know. We don't get any notice of it. And if you do figure it out, they don't tell you why. So much for due process and being able to figure out what it is that you're doing. So the technocrats are in charge, and what's going to happen with the Digital Services Act and the regulations that grew up around that, and that's really targeting the 20 or so biggest tech companies. If they violate it, like if they don't take content down quickly as the technocrats in Europe want, they will be fined 6% of their worldwide revenue. That's a lot of money, because some companies don't operate on a 6% profit margin. So here was von der Leyen. Here's some other things that she said. Second, on digital public infrastructures, they can be a real booster to emerging economies. India has achieved remarkable success in rolling out its digital public infrastructures. Now, what I want you to see, though, is they've sort of changed from digital platforms and internet and technology and controlling things to, they now call it digital public infrastructures, DPI. We heard that the Prime Minister and very much supports initiative to talk about India. The possibilities are huge, the investments small. The trick is to build public digital infrastructure that is interoperable, open to all, and trusted, meaning to the technocrats. Let me give you one example that is reality today. Many of you are familiar with the Charlie Vector 019er digital certificate. The EU developed it for itself. The model was so functional and so trusted that 51 countries on 4 continents adopted it for free. Today, the WHO uses it as a global standard to facilitate mobility in times of health threats. I want to thank Dr. Tedros again for the excellent cooperation. So this was her statement that she issued about, hey, here's a great corridor. It's going to help us put in digital infrastructure. And then we have things that we want to do. We want to control things. And then she issues this public statement. And so if you look at the European Commission website, they talk about this certificate. And it says here, a step towards what? Global health security. To facilitate the uptake of the certificate by the WHO and contribute to its operation and further development, the WHO and the European Commission have agreed to partner in digital health. Now, it was either late last year, they had a G20 meeting, and in connection with that, they had sort of, I think it was called the B20 meeting for business, and there the Indonesian health minister said this about the certificate.
So let's have a digital health certificate acknowledged by WHO. If you have been vaccinated or tested properly, then you can move around. So for the next pandemic, instead of stopping the movement of the people 100%, which clogged the economy globally, you can still provide some movement of the people. Indonesia has achieved, G20 country has agreed to have this digital certificate using WHO standard, and we will submit into the next World Health Assembly in Geneva as the revision to international health regulation. So hopefully for the next pandemic, we can still see some movement of the people, some movement of the goods, and movement of the economy.
So, I mean, he sort of acknowledges that, well, what happened in the last one was it really there was too much control. So this was also issued at the G20, the G20 Leaders Declaration. And again, they talked about, this also came out of the G20 policy recommendations for advancing financial inclusion. There's your diversity, equity, inclusion, and productivity gains through digital public infrastructure. That's the key term that they're using. Here's from that publication. It says this: DPI as interoperable, open, and inclusive systems supported by technology serves to provide essential public and private services for the common good. That's a common theme. And here's somebody from the UN saying, look, I've been working on this for a long time. And we want to include everybody. This is also coming out. This is reported in a number of defense-related situations. US SOCOM to use AI to detect disinformation threats on social media. And you're going to see this. It's, I just don't post that much on social media anymore. I have friends all the time. I'm banned for 6 months from having my posts seen on Facebook, or I'm just banned from posting on Facebook. And things get taken down, and people don't know why, but this is what's going. So this was at the defensepost.com on using AI to detect disinformation. And there's a company software program. One of the ones they're using is called Argus, ARGUS. You can look it up. And this is from a couple weeks ago. So this is what's happening. So let's look at the Middle East. So I'm going to focus a little bit. Here's a headline from the Jerusalem Post about the Mossad chief Barnea hints at thwarted Russian arms deal. This was a speech that was given at the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University in Israel. And securing tomorrow, enhancing CT efforts, counterterrorism efforts in a changing world. And I'm going to look at a number of the speeches that happen here. Here is Barnea speaking. He's the head of the Mossad. The Mossad and other intelligence bodies have thwarted 27 Iranian terrorist plots against Israelis on almost every continent so far this year. Mossad Director David Barnea said Sunday, he and his allies have had a hand in blocking Russian-Iranian arms deals, which could have led to Iran getting more advanced weapons, Barnea hinted during a speech at Reichman University's International Counterterrorism Conference. The first factor feeding Iran's overinflated ego is the assistance that has been given Russia through the sale of UAVs. He also went through and he sort of recounted the history of a number of the different terror plots, like Turkey 2022. They were paying people, they were filming Israeli citizens in hotels because they were plotting to kill them. That was done. There was in Georgia, a squad of assassins were sent by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, were arrested in Georgia after trying to murder an Israeli citizen. They also had other potential attacks that took place. I think there was one in Cyprus, and there was also in Greece earlier this year. And so Iran's been at this for a long time, and they issued warnings to Israeli citizens to maybe ought to be careful about going out. So he revealed, as I said, some of these Iranian plots that were being done. I think I have a little bit of a translation of his audio because he spoke in Hebrew. You can get it on YouTube. I think I have 10 seconds to go before this turns into audio. Here's the one in Cyprus. And the person says, I was using WhatsApp to get information from the Iranians about what I was supposed to do, my marching orders. So they're using social media.
למשטר האיראני
The Iranian regime has no longer room for denial, nor does it have impunity. Our message is direct, clear, and determined. Those who Saab decided to dispatch the terror teams, rest assured, we will get to you, and justice will be done for all to see.
שנגיע אליכם.
This has been proven in the past, and we have no other choice. In the future, we will ramp it up to the next level.
אין לנו ברירה.
This is state-sponsored terror.
אנחנו נעלה
Let me be clear. We are talking about a political directive handed down by the supreme leader.
של המנהיג.
The funding comes from the state coffers, and planning and execution are done by national security and intelligence bodies.
של גופי הביטחון והמודיעין.
So he also said Israel is ready to extract a price from the highest officials in the heart of Iran, if necessary, to defend Israel from Iran's attacks and threats. Proxies are Iran's way to hide its terrorist face, but Tehran is behind practically everything: terrorist acts, logistics, money, and support, all under orders from their very top, he said. The world needs to understand the danger of a terrorist state that also becomes a nuclear state, Bardia said, adding that Iran will never get a nuclear weapon. Next month, the UN weapons embargo expires from the 2015 JCPOA, something Iran will use to gain cheaper access to weapons. Listen, Trump took out the JCPOA, the agreement that that Obama had entered into with Iran. It should have been a treaty. It was never a treaty. Obama said, oh, it's just an executive agreement. It was a treaty. He lied. He lied about everything. He's a propagandist, and he lied about that. And so now that JCPOA, though, had provisions in it that Iran could not do certain things until 2024. That expires next year anyway, even if the JCPOA had been put in place. And so what the current Biden regime is doing is they're trying to put in another agreement, a secret agreement. In fact, if you want to read this article, I talked about it with Pablo, I think I mentioned it last Sunday. Biden backdoors Israel in the United Nations is a tablet magazine by Tony Badran, B-A-D-R-A-N, September 6, 2023. Biden backdoors Israel in the UN, rescinding Trump's recognition of sovereignty over the Golan. So what Tony Badran focused on was one little slice of changing language in one of the UN publications. And this is done while Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, is at the UN. This is done while we have people at the UN, and they changed the language about this area around Tel Dan, Sheba Farms, which used to be part of Syria. It's a disputed area. Israel took it back in the Six-Day War, and it's where there's villages called Gajar, G-H-A-J-A-R. And if you're at Tel Dan, in the area where the golden calf was erected by King Jeroboam, you can see the exact place where this took place. You look up the hill a mile or two away, and there's Gajar. Now, it's open to Israeli citizens. It was for a while in Israel. Then the UN said, well, it needs to be half in Israel and half in Lebanon. But in the resolution dealing with this particular area, they called this the occupied area, which means Israel, when they say occupied, it means Israel has no right to be in that particular area. So this is what Barnea said. There was also a speech by James Cleverly, the foreign minister of the UK. Here's a little bit of what he said at his speech.
We must also be careful to avoid a council of despair, because there have been so many wonderful, positive developments in this region. Because last year, for example, in the Negev summit, building on the 2020 Abraham Accords, we saw light, we saw positivity. And just this weekend, Israeli officials took their place at a UN meeting hosted in Saudi Arabia, alongside other delegations from around the world. I hope, we all hope, that the next steps in Israel's in the normalizing of Israel's relationships with its neighbors will carry us even further forward and even further along the path to sustainable, long-term peace
Everybody
in this
uses
region.
the term sustainable. He goes on to say, what we need is a two-state solution. Now, when he says two-state solution, just to clarify what he means, is he doesn't mean what the original two-state solution was, which was Israel and Jordan. And that was agreed to by the international community at San Remo, Italy in 1920. But then when the UN got involved in the 40s, they said, no, it's 3 states. It's Transjordan and Israel and this Palestinian state that now called the West Bank. So that's 3 states, and they might want 4 states because they might want Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, and Israel. So this nonsense about a 2-state solution is just gobbledygook. So here is the head of the, you'll see his title, the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister and head of the National Security Council of Israel. And when he spoke, he said that he had had a long discussion with the Palestinians about the Saudi issue. Quote, we asked them not to let this opportunity slip away and to be partners in the conversation, contribute to its success, and also benefit from it. We are very much in favor of there being a significant Palestinian component in this agreement, with the exception of a move that would harm Israel's security, but everything below that, we are ready to discuss it. This is what the Bloomberg interview that I played last week from Prime Minister Netanyahu said. We really can't agree to a totally independent Palestinian state. There's weapons being smuggled in. They're being smuggled in by Iranian proxies into the Judea and Samaria, what's also called the West Bank, and it's causing a problem. There's a lot of organized crime activity in the Palestinian areas. A lot of people have been murdered because of the gang activity, but there's also a lot of Israelis that are being attacked. They went after a checkpoint yesterday with explosive devices. Now, I don't think that the explosive devices were going to happen, but I saw this morning there's a map that you can go to, and it's essentially free. I don't think you need to even register to use it. It's called Live UA Map, liveuamap.com. And if you go there, you can click on different regions of the world, and it will give you sort of an active, interactive update of news related to conflict regions in the world. And they have a bunch of them. They have the Caucasus region. There's a big conflict going on, or potential war going on, between Azerbaijan and Armenia right now. They've had a conflict over the past few years. And a lot of these things, just like in Ukraine and Russia, we talk about current conflicts, and we talk about, well, 8 years ago or 9 years ago, Russia took back Crimea, and Ukraine, and there was a revolution in Ukraine. But listen, this stuff, if you talk to somebody from Ukraine or Russia, they will talk about, somebody did something bad 5 centuries ago, and we're still ticked off about it, and we want to settle the score. That's just the way it is, and this is true in many places throughout the world. I mean, you talk about the conflict in the Balkans and Serbia. They talk about something that happened in the late 1300s, like it happened yesterday, and we're still, we're 15 generations or 25 generations beyond that, but we're still ticked off about it, and we want to settle the score. So this is true throughout the Middle East. So the head of the National Security Council there in Israel, he talked about the fact that, the Palestinian issue is a big deal, and we need to solve that. They also had a counterterrorism expert and academic who came in and looked at some of the things that they did, like a survey of people who are involved in counterterrorism, and look at the terminology they're using is the same terminology that our government is using against people that don't agree with the government. Extremism related to climate change, controversies and conflicts. Research on extreme right-wing white right-wing groups, say that fast 5 times, racially and ethically motivated violence, study of mainstreaming far right-wing ideology. He also talks about the fact that this is a good thing, that the concept of stochastic terrorism has been developed. It really doesn't have any meaning. Look it up. It's what they've come in and made up this term like it's a real thing. And so this is, it's sort of on the order of sticks and stones will break my bones, and words will always hurt me. That they've sort of changed that little phrase that we used to say when we were a kid. Significant and sophisticated empirical studies of the links between mental illness, social maladjustment, and violent extremism. If you don't agree with us, you're crazy. You're mentally ill. And so they now they're developing research to support all of these things that they want to talk about. So here's some of the questions that they have. Now, another important speech was given by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He accused Iran of setting up an airport in southern Lebanon 20 kilometers, 12 miles from the Israeli border, which he said was being used for terror purposes against Israel. And this is a huge area of conflict, the northern border. Gallant also went on to say in his speech, under the auspices of the changes in the Middle East, Iran manages a process of ideological and geographic conquest versus many countries in the region. It deals with crumbling states from where it performs hostile takeovers, and in other countries, it essentially stimulates countries into a state of failure, bringing them to their knees for that same purpose. It's not too dissimilar from what the Belt and Road Initiative does with other countries. I mean, China goes in, they enter into these agreements like in Ecuador to build dams and everything. The dams fall apart, but they say, hey, you owe us money, give us your oil. And China's been doing this all over the world. So here's a graphic that he used in his speech of this airport that's been built 12 miles from the Israeli border in southern Lebanon, and from which, you see it's got an airstrip, it's got a helipad, and they think that this is going to be used to launch drones. Remember, it was maybe 3 years ago, maybe longer, that Iran forced, they hacked into a very sophisticated U.S. drone and caused it to land. It landed in Iran, they came and they reversed engineered it. And so when you see some of these pictures and videos of Iranian drones that they're developing, some of them have basis in U.S. technology that the Iranians stole when they forced this drone to land. So, so Gallant also said that the activities are directed by Iran. Nasrallah
מילים אחרות,
forgot.
האדמה היא אדמה לבנונית, השליטה היא שליטה איראנית.
Well, I didn't expect that to pop up. I thought I had a translation there. Hezbollah aspires to illustrate itself as the defender of Lebanon. Nevertheless, it essentially holds the state of Lebanon and its citizens hostages. As hostages. As a matter of fact, Hezbollah hopes to advance Iran's Shiite interest in these activities may lead it to a crucial mistake. So one of the solutions that Israel's coming up, though, with is they're trying to normalize things with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has sort of entered into, they've had a agreement with Iran, but I think it was Gallant at the conference who said, you know, look, their agreement with Iran is not going to last very long because they're eventually going to end up in a conflict. But the Saudis are looking for help. They can't defend themselves. They want to they want to develop a nuclear energy industry. People are concerned about that. There's some talk, well, if they do that, Israel will have the kill switch. I don't know if it will work. And so there's this big push to have these normalization agreements with everybody. But one of the big things is drones. So Prime Minister Netanyahu went to a Rosh Hashanah toast, and he mentioned a little bit about Saudi Arabia agreement and how important that was. Here's a little bit. This is the lead-in to the celebration at Rosh Hashanah. here's what Netanyahu said when he got to the subject of this. At the same time, we also have a good opportunity, which is that having achieved the Abraham Accords, we are working together with our American friends to expand the circle of peace in a way that will change the face of Israel, the Middle East, and to a large degree, the world. So Netanyahu views this as, I think in the Bloomberg interview, he called it, this is a pivot of history that's taking place in the Middle East, this potential normalization with Saudi Arabia. We intend to have peace with Saudi Arabia, which will pave the way to turning the region into a major corridor of vital infrastructure. Israel is becoming a bridgehead into the world. This is an intense change. Each of you will feel it, Netanyahu said. At the same time, this is going on. We have the G20 meeting. We have Netanyahu talking about this. We also have an Israeli delegation, the first formal Israeli delegation to go to Saudi Arabia to meet with UNESCO, which in and of itself is kind of an amazing thing because UNESCO hates Israel. But, and so what happened this week in the Bible prophecy community, you may not have noticed it, I did. A lot of people, some people have the theory that the Sustainable Development Goals, because they have 7 years to go and 2030, which I've talked about, I think 2030 could be a very significant year in Bible prophecy about the return of the Lord. But I'm not date setting. I think it could be 2030 to 2033. Could actually be 2028 to 2033, because we're not sure about the exact year that Jesus returned. I think 30 AD is probably a pretty good marker. And I think God gave us some time markers to look at. I do think, contrary to what people said to me this week, this is an incredibly significant time in Bible prophecy. This is different. Why? Well, one of the things is Israel is back in the land. And you can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 35, 36, 37. Now, I don't believe Ezekiel 37 dry bones prophecy has been completely fulfilled. I don't believe that Ezekiel 36 has been completely fulfilled. I believe it's in the process of being fulfilled because remember in Ezekiel 36, it says, I'm going to send you out of your land because you've played the harlot with all the people around you. But I'm going to bring you back, not because you've really changed that much, but because my name is at stake, because I promise this. And when I bring you back in unbelief, then I will put a new heart within you, and you will know that I am the Lord. I don't think we're at that stage yet. I think we're in the process of getting there. And all of this is a process that's happening. So everybody's excited, normalization with Israel, but then people say, well, the Sustainable Development Goals, that's the covenant of the many in Daniel 9:27, because they're talking about we need to get this done in 7 years. I don't think it is, because and I heard about 4 different views on what the covenant with death and Sheol that's talked about in Isaiah 28 is this week. In fact, I heard one this morning that I'd never heard before. And the person said it, and the host of the interview, the guy who was doing the interview said, yeah, I agree with that. I'm like, what? So now I got to call people that do conferences with this guy, but I won't talk about who it is. But I was kind of surprised. I wasn't expecting it, but I don't think this is the covenant of the many. I don't. Then somebody said, oh, well, the Saudis announced we're going to have a meeting on the sidelines with the European Union at the UN this week to talk about peace in the Middle East and normalization with Israel, but Israel and the Palestinians aren't invited. So immediately, guys were putting up videos saying, now the Israeli peace thing is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the Palestinians have wanted that for a long time. I think they published something back in 2018 saying there shouldn't be 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there should be 18. And they published that, but nobody's ever done anything with it. But everybody's saying, oh, now this is all part, this is the covenant, this is, and then the implications are when the rapture happens and all this other stuff. And I was talking to some people that I trust a lot, and I said, I'm concerned when people over-realize their eschatology. everybody wants to say, this is that which was prophesied. We all want to say that. But I don't think it should be a one-off guy sitting in his studio doing a video on YouTube. I'm concerned about that because what happened with regard to the normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia? Well, we needed to wait like 2 days after all these videos. And these people, I don't want you to think that people put up a video like that and it gets tens of thousands of views, 100,000 views almost immediately. Because it's good news. People want to hear this. It means, we're going to meet the Lord. We want to do that. We all want that. But we have to be careful making these pronouncements. That's my point. And so what happened, this is a report in Israeli paper. Report, Saudi Arabia asked to freeze the normalization talks with Israel. This just came out this morning, just before the Netanyahu-Biden meeting. The Saudi Elaf website reports that a senior official in the Israeli Prime Minister's office said that the U.S. informed Israel of the Saudi decision following the opposition of Israeli government officials to any gesture or measures towards the Palestinians. And that's not true, but that's how it's viewed. I've talked a lot about the Saudi involvement in this, that the Saudis seem to want to take control of the Temple Mount, that there are people that think they're going to divide the Temple Mount. I showed you the picture last week that when the U.S. just talked about moving the embassy to Jerusalem in December 2017, the immediate response of the Erdogan's mouthpiece newspaper was to put up maybe the best map of Ezekiel 38 and 39 that I've ever seen. So if something is done with regard to the Temple Mount, there's going to be a war. But in the process of that, you've got to get a lot of agreements in place before you go that far. So the Saudis are saying, we're going to pause this. And listen, there's a generation shift going on in Saudi Arabia. The king is not in good health. I personally think that when the king dies, Mohammed bin Salman will take the reins and do what he wants to do. And he appears to be kind of done with the Palestinians. I'm tired of them. And the way this works out with this pausing the normalization talks is I don't have to deal with them right now. And mind you, this all comes the week that there's been a remembrance of 30 years ago, September 13th, 1993, White House lawn and the Oslo Accords being enacted when Clinton made Yitzhak Rabin shake the hands of Yasser Arafat. And that has not gone well. I could do hours talking about all the things that have gone on since then. But so the Saudi website, Elaf, this is the headline here, Saudi Arabia stops discussion. American sources, informed American sources said that Saudi Arabia brought the Palestinians into the discussion in an intelligent manner so that it could decide on the form and date of the agreement with the Israelis and demarcate the borders of their independent state without interference from the outside and without Israeli opposition, as they tried to do in the Abraham Accords, which did not succeed in any way in any agreement with them. So everybody was saying, oh, this is it. This is the covenant. This is it. And then the Saudis come out this morning and just kind of blow that all up. And so that's what I'm saying is we have to be careful with these things. Let them marinate for like a couple days to see what happens. Because you may not have noticed that things seem to happen very suddenly in the world today. There are a lot of things going on. By the way, tomorrow night, tomorrow and Tuesday, I think Yishai Fleischer, who I know, is involved in this. Route 60, the Biblical Highway, David Friedman, and former Secretary of State, former Ambassador to Israel from the U.S., and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are involved in this. I think Yishai is in it too. Highway 60, the Biblical Highway. And if you've ever driven Route 60, it's a tremendous trip all the way from Hebron all the way up to Nablus, Shechem, Shiloh, all those places along Highway 60, the Avenue of the Patriarchs. Go past Bethel, remember I've seen those pictures of Bethel where Jeroboam did the southern version of what I call him the seeker sensitive worship. You don't have to go all the way to Dan or we'll put one in Bethel too. So you don't have to go that far to worship the golden calf. The first seeker sensitive worship leader, I think, in Judeo-Christian tradition. But so that anyway, this is playing 2 nights, Monday and Tuesday, and I know it's at a number of theaters locally. So if you want to see that, I only saw a very short preview. It looks pretty good. I will also, just in the interest of time, I'm going to refer you to Israel Hayom and an excellent article by Jonathan Spire, who talks in his article about the Syria interest for Israel. Jonathan is probably one of the leading wars correspondent experts on Syria in the world. And he talks about what's going to happen in this northern theater when something happens. You can see Beirut there. You can see Haifa there along the coast. And then you also see, you can see Damascus over there up and to the right. And understand, this is not a big area. From Damascus to Beirut is 50 miles as the crow flies. It's not that far. So, Nahariya is just essentially almost right on the border. And there's a lot of dispute going on. I talked about Amos Hochstein and his interference in that. So what Israel did this week was Israel went into Syria and they bombed a number of installations, one around Damascus, one at Homs, and one over at Tartus. This is, and so there's this game that goes on between Israel and Iran, and nobody wants to go all the way to full-out war. This war has been determined or looked at, war gamed on a number of levels. This is JINSA's no daylight U.S. strategy if Israel attacks Iran. I don't remember. This was published in July, and it talked about what are we going to do? How's this going to go? We're war gaming a war between Iran and Israel, and they talked about the fact that there has to be no daylight between Israel and the U.S. when this happens, because that would really put Israel at great risk. And it's going to be difficult. Right now, I don't know that our government would do anything. It may be, by the way, that the Saudis decided to put a hold on things because they don't like the way the Biden administration is doing this secret agreement with Iran. And maybe the Saudis are hedging their bet and saying, we'll wait till the November 2024 elections, and things may change in the U.S., and we may have a more favorable government at the time. That would be a reasonable thing. By the way, the Saudis will be holding pretty soon, I think next month, their Financial Investment Initiative Institute 7th conference. This is where a lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff from. There's the World Government Summit coming up in January in the United Arab Emirates. And all of these things are sort of in the UN meetings, and then they have COP28 later this year in the United Arab Emirates. Again, the big climate change, net zero, all this stuff, sustainable development goals, all of this stuff is working together. Here's what this war game thing says. U.S. policymakers should be guided by the basic principle of demonstrating no daylight between America and Israel, immediate and unwavering U.S. support for Israel on the day of a strike, and strong pressure on Tehran and its proxies, especially Hezbollah, in the days after, holds out the best prospect of mitigating inevitable Iran-led retaliation. Should Washington be perceived as reluctant or half-hearted in support of Israel? Doubts that other U.S. partners have about the dependability of their U.S. security assurances will multiply exponentially. So that's, you can find that online, JINSA. It stands for I had it written down here and I don't see it now. So anyway, you can find that online pretty easily. Just Google the title. Iran, they were at a SCO meeting. Iran also talked about a war game that the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Israel did back in July. And they said, oh boy, they were really afraid about everything. INSS, but they've been talking about this a long time. This is from 2012 or 2010, a strategic simulation of war between Iran and Israel. People have been talking about this a long time, and the question is whether it's going to come. Iran's got some new air defense mechanisms that they have in place. They claim it's able to hit dozens of targets at once. They're hyping it. There's a good article by my friend Seth Frantzman in the Jerusalem Post on Friday about what Iran is doing. Hypersonic missile development, air defense superiority. And here's the part, this comes from a Haaretz article about this war game back in July. And the Tehran Times review of that. Let me see, we just got a couple more things. So listen, there's been a couple of big natural disasters in the past week. Earthquake in Morocco, thousands dead. Big flood in Libya. In the non-UN portion, there's two governments that are governing India. There's a UN-backed, and then there's the other guy, who, by the way, his name is Haftar, Khalifa Haftar, and he was very close to Gaddafi. They had a falling out. He fled to the United States, lived in Langley, Virginia, of all places, for about 20 years. Now he's back in power, but this is the city that is in the area that he controls, and the numbers are hard to get. There's at least 11,000 dead, and there might be 10 or 20,000 missing, maybe more, as a couple dams failed and rushed down through the valley in a storm. The storm was named Daniel, by the way. It's kind of interesting. And people were just, it was sort of like, it sort of sounded like Maui in some respects. Residents of Derna said they were issued confusing, sometimes contradictory orders on whether to evacuate. Many ended up trapped in their apartment buildings as the waters rushed through. And so they've been burying them in mass graves. So there were a couple dams failed, water came down through, destroyed all that area that you see down there. The red buildings are all gone. The blue and yellow are pretty much flooded and destroyed. And people are really upset with the government there, this Khalifa Haftar. But the other part of this is that Russia has been working with Khalifa Haftar to get a port on the Mediterranean. They want another warm water port. And now this Haftar guy is in big trouble with the people in Libya. So that's kind of interesting. One more thing related to this, and then one other thing. Putin went to meet with Baby Kim this week about weapons. Xi is a little bit upset about this, but because Xi is pushing the envelope with Taiwan. This is a video that comes from the Caspian Report that talks about, Taiwan may be able to respond in a way that would concern China. This is the Three Gorges Dam. It's 300 meters high. It's 2 kilometers, about 1.5 miles long. It's the largest dam project on planet Earth. It controls a very important valley. And so the concern is that if there's a war, China attacks Taiwan, that they may go in and attack the Three Gorges Dam and destroy it. We saw what happened in Ukraine when a dam was destroyed. We don't know who destroyed it. Everybody claims it was the other guy. But look at what the flooding potential is if that dam is destroyed. It would affect 400 million people. It would effectively now they'll probably retaliate against Taiwan, but Taiwan has to evaluate, what do we do? If they take out that dam, 2/3 of China's rice production is gone. What does that do to the food situation when it affects potentially 400 people? And there's a lot of cities along there, Shanghai and a little place you might have heard about over the last few years named Wuhan. So just understand, this guy at the Caspian Report does these incredible, I got to figure out how he does this. These maps and videos that he does are just fantastic. I think he's from Azerbaijan. He does a great job. If you want to support his channel, support him. And people say, well, he just uses stuff available on the internet. I've not been able to figure it out. I don't have enough time to do that, but I would love to be able to do maps like this. So Caspian Report, check that out. A lot of things going on. There are the hoofbeats of war everywhere you look. There are natural disasters going on. There's peace talked about in the Middle East. There's a huge UN meeting this week, Sustainable Development Goals, digital things, they want to control everything. So pay attention, because this really is a pretty significant time. So let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for giving us the ability to understand some of the things that are going on. We pray that you will keep us strong in the faith, give us the strength of your Holy Spirit to stand up to the things that are going on, to protect our families and to take the appropriate stands. Give us wisdom on how to act, how to prepare for the things that appear to be coming on us very soon, but always give us an opportunity to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around it, because we know that that is their only hope. But help us to fellowship with other believers, get involved with other believers, like-minded believers, so that we can stand firm in these days. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.